Hello, I'm Dr. Bradley Elisea. I'm the head scientist at the Orthogonal Research and Education Laboratory. We're located in Champaign-Urbana in Illinois in the United States, but we have a lot of collaborators worldwide. We can be found on Weebly, YouTube, GitHub, LinkedIn. We have a Medium, and we're on Twitter. And today I'm going to talk to you about developmental AI and some of our perspectives on it and how we're realizing some of those ideas. So starting in 2021, we developed this developmental AI roadmap, and I've updated it for this year, but it's basically a very similar roadmap. So we have all these different boxes with all these different terms in it, and these terms represent the kinds of work that we're trying to do to sort of take advantage of developmental approaches to AI. So our approaches to development are very different from a lot of other groups. A lot of groups focus on developmental psychology and maybe like the things that babies do or the things that humans do in development. Our perspective is a lot broader, and it involves sort of the fundamental aspects of development, generativity, and things like that. And we'll talk about that later, but also morphogenesis and some of the things that you see in developmental biology. And so this is a biologically inspired approach. It's also a psychologically inspired approach. And we've developed different types of tools or theoretical affordances, if you will. So, one of them is Gibsonian information. And this is information theory from a Gibsonian or ecological, psychological perspective. We also have something called developmental Bratenberg vehicles, where we develop Bratenberg vehicles and we exploit developmental processes in the design and behavior of these vehicles. These are robotic agents, but they can also just be computational agents in a machine. So, we've explored that area quite a bit. Heredity and innate processes are something that we sort of under the surface of a lot of this work. So it does assume that there is an innate set of innate processes that drive development and that those are inherited in different ways. So we haven't worked out a lot of the details on that, but it underpins a lot of this work. And we have a specific sort of point of view on it, that you have these innate processes that interact with these developmental or generative processes, things like plasticity and other types of developmental phenomena that give you these kind of developmentally inspired agents. We've also done work on allostasis machines, which are these computational models that model physiological allostasis, or the exploration of different physiological states given some perturbation from the external environment. We've also done work on metabrain models, which are these layered representational structures that represent maybe like a brain or a control system or even like an embodied robot. And we've given presentations on that. We've explored the confluence of artificial neural networks and biological neural networks, and you'll see an example of that in a little bit. We've taken Gibsonian information on developmental Bratenberg vehicles and combine those in many ways. One way is in this idea of continual embodied learning. So we believe that learning is embodied, development is also embodied, and there's this continual nature of it. So there's a life history of learning that's important to the agent. There's also maybe a hereditary aspect that's important to the agent. And we're interested in dynamical behavior, dynamical systems. We're also interested in offloading and the development of offloading capacity. So that's when an agent offloads information into its environment and interacts with it. And then finally, dynamical heterochrony and morphogenesis. And this is connected to embodiment in an interesting way. Heterochrony is, of course, the sort of the growth trajectory of an organism in development. So you can slow it down or speed it up, and you can change the shape and the size of the organism. We use dynamical heterochrony, or at least computational models of that, to model some of the morphogenesis of the body, of the embodied agent, or of the brain of the agent. And then we use some of these other techniques to look at what kind of developmental benefits that agent gets out of it. So there are a lot of pieces to this roadmap. Some of them have been realized in preprint, some of them in more formal publications, others in conference talks, and some of them still need work. So related to this is a concept exploration map. So when we think about developmental AI, we also think of these broad concepts, and this is important in theory building. So you see a lot of words thrown around like collective behavior, transformations, generativity, learning, embodiment. We are inspired also by tensegrity, which is structures that are held stable by dynamic tension, layered representations, morphogenesis, offloading, and heterochromy. And all these, I think I mentioned some of these before. Embodiment, of course, is well known. Layered representations are present in our metabrains. And collective behavior also has an interesting relationship to development, which we've explored in some of our work as well. And so all of these terms are sort of if you think of like a glossary of our approach to developmental AI, all of these terms would be in that glossary. And we're developing theory building techniques to bring these, not only bring the concepts in the last slide together, but to bring these other terms together, define them further in the context of our approach. So now I'm going to talk about a sort of an instance of developmental AI that we've been working on, and a couple of papers we've worked on this idea. It's called developmental neurosimulation. And the idea is we're trying to develop these artificial nervous systems, or rather these artificial organisms that have nervous systems inside of them. And they have an innate component and they have an environmental interaction. And there are all sorts of things going on here. But we start with an body of the embodied, and the body is very important. But a lot of groups haven't really talked about evolving the body in a way that's there have been like morphological robotics groups that have done this, but thinking about this more in terms of a developmental approach and the way we're approaching it is kind of unique. So the body of the embodied exhibits morphogenesis, growth, and location awareness. So this square is a body. The morphogenesis part is, you'll see in a minute, where this square will transform into a more complex phenotype. This square can grow, and things inside the square can grow. So you can have relative growth of different structures. And then you have location awareness. So one side of the square is different from the other side of the square. There's an orientation. We'll see that in a minute. So the next thing you have then is pattern formation. So morphogenesis and differential growth occur through pattern formation. You get structuring of this empty square into maybe a gradient, as you see here. Morphogenesis can create layers such as this. This can lead to differential representational ability, or can lead to differential function. There are a number of possibilities here. Our metabrains are sort of modeled after this sort of pattern formation. We don't talk about it so much in the context of metabrains, but different layers of representation can be thought of also as being a product of pattern formation. And that pattern formation can interact with representations in a unique way. So again, metabrains, this pattern formation can lead to things like metabrains, layers of neural network processing, and the complexity that determines the degree of offloading. So more complex brains might offload their cognitive processing less. Less complex brains may have to do it more. We can size the size of the brain case versus the size of the body in different ways, and that can lead to different behaviors, or we can enable offloading and we can make up for it. There are a lot of options here, and we're really at the stage of kind of exploring some of these features, because we've brought together a lot of ideas. Now we're kind of putting together our artifacts. And so this is an example of an orientable neural network, which is kind of the third part of this, where you have an anterior to posterior axis. So this left side of the square now is the front, or the anterior portion of the agent. The right-hand side is the posterior, or the back end of the agent. And in the anterior end of the agent, or the front, you have sensors. At the back and on the back side, you have effectors. Those effectors move the organism through the environment. The sensors take sensory information in, and it feeds it into a series of interneurons, which are connected in different ways. And those interneurons can exhibit asymmetries, which can have an effect on the behavior of the effectors, and also the sensors, because the sensors will are in the context of how the effector is moving the body. So if the body is oriented in a certain way in the environment, the sensors are picking up certain information rather than other information. So all of this fits together. You have this neural network that we can grow inside of this agent. It can exhibit asymmetries. It can also exhibit symmetries and high levels of redundancy, which can actually be good for information processing. It can also be good for offloading potential or maybe inhibit offloading potential. So we're exploring all these issues. So the next steps are to promote this approach under different guises. We did this at a couple of conferences where this poster on an introduction of developmental embodied neurosimulation was presented. And there are at least about 10 authors on this poster, and it kind of shows the different components, like I showed in the roadmap, and how they've sort of been put together. We also want to develop software and use cases for developmental Bradenburg vehicles, MetaBrains models, and offloading agents. So we've developed a lot of the theory and the sort of the architecture of it. Now we want to develop hard software, which we have done for the developmental Bradenburg vehicles, but we still need use cases for those. And we need use cases for all of these. We also need more theory building. We've done a lot of theory building, but what we need in the theory building area is to sort of bring things together. So there's a lot of synthesis that actually needs to be done. And so we can ask questions like why a developmental approach is advantageous, and what other approaches to developmental AI and machine learning can we learn from? So there are many other approaches to developmental AI and machine learning. Some involve just computational agents exploring their environment, having different ways of developing. People have done that work. People have also taken inspiration from human babies. People have taken other types of inspiration, such as serial acquisition in neural networks, and all those things are, something we can learn from and build theory and do synthesis with. And then finally, we want to recruit new lab participants around this theme and develop combinations of the distinct components that I mentioned in the first two slides. So there, we have our sort of sets of things that are important for developmental AI. We also have our sets of terms that are important for developmental AI, the way we approach it. And we want lab participants to play around with those concepts, maybe redefine them, maybe figure out why they're important and how, if you combine certain elements, how those can be advantageous in an artifact. And so we've done some work on theory building, on synthesis. This is an example from one of our lab meetings on the bottom left, where we were trying to put together a continuum of embodiment. So this is something that, of course, if we're talking about the development of embodiment, the continuum of embodiment from something like a brain in a jar to full embodiment, whatever that might look like, is an important thing to have. And again, this is just some of the things that we do. We like to play around with ideas, but we also like to kind of define our terms and kind of understand where it fits into the world. So if you want to know more, go to our website, the Representational Brains and Phenotypes website at that URL, representational-brains-phenotypes.weebly.com, or contact myself or Jesse Parent, who's the lab manager. And thank you for your attention.